If she disappeared tomorrow, nothing in this family would really change. Those were the first words I heard when I walked up to my parents' front porch carrying a blueberry pie that was still warm from my oven. I remember freezing with my hand inches away from the front door because I recognized my mother's voice immediately. 88 years old, sharp as broken glass, and somehow still able to make me feel like a little girl standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Inside the dining room, silverware clinked softly against expensive plates while the chandelier reflected warm yellow light across the table I had spent 20 years paying for. My father let out a quiet laugh, the kind he always used when he wanted to avoid conflict. Then my mother said something that made my stomach drop so fast I had to grip the railing beside the porch steps to steady myself. She's basically a burden now. I stood there in silence, the cold March wind moving through the maple trees beside the driveway while my entire body felt numb. The pie dish suddenly weighed 100 pounds in my hands. I had driven 45 minutes through evening traffic after spending 6 hours volunteering at St. Andrew's Food Pantry because my mother insisted family dinners still mattered. Sunday dinners are what keep families together, she always said. Funny how the people who say things like that are usually the ones quietly tearing everything apart. Through the slightly open dining room window, I could hear my son Ethan speaking next. "Mom's just lonely," he said casually. "She doesn't really have anything else going on anymore." My chest tightened so hard I could barely breathe. Lonely. That was the word he chose after everything. After 32 years of raising him mostly by myself after my husband Daniel died from a heart attack at 53. After working double shifts at the insurance office to keep Ethan in college. After draining half my retirement savings to help him and his wife Melissa buy their first home 6 years ago. Lonely. I stayed outside another few seconds, though every instinct told me to get back in my car and leave. But then my mother laughed softly and said, "Margaret still thinks she's needed around here." That sentence hurt worse than the first one. Because until that moment, I truly believed I was needed. I believed all the birthday dinners, holiday gatherings, and Sunday meals meant something. I believed the framed family photos lining my parents' hallway represented love instead of obligation. I believed Ethan still saw me as more than an aging widow whose usefulness had expired. The front door suddenly opened before I could gather myself. Melissa stood there holding a wine glass, her blonde hair perfectly curled, her soft beige sweater looking like something from a magazine catalog. Her smile appeared instantly when she saw me, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Margaret! We were wondering where you were." Wondering where I was. Meanwhile, they had been discussing whether my existence even mattered. "Traffic was bad," I said quietly, forcing a smile onto my face while handing her the pie dish. "I brought dessert." "That's sweet," she replied, though her tones sounded distracted, almost rehearsed. As I stepped into the house, the smell of roast chicken and rosemary filled the air. The dining room looked beautiful. Crystal glasses. Linen napkins. Candles glowing softly near the centerpieces. It looked exactly like the kind of family dinner people post online with captions about gratitude and blessings. But suddenly the entire room felt staged, like I had accidentally walked onto a theater set where everyone already knew the script except me. My father looked up first when I entered. For half a second, guilt flashed across his face before disappearing beneath a weak smile. Ethan stood to hug me, but the embrace felt quick and empty. "Hey Mom," he said. "You made it." Made it. Like I was a guest instead of family. My mother barely glanced at me while cutting another piece of chicken onto her plate. "You're late," she said flatly. "Dinner's already getting cold." Not one person asked how my day had been. Not one person noticed my hands trembling slightly as I sat down. And maybe that was the moment something inside me finally cracked. Because while everyone passed dishes around the table pretending everything was perfectly normal, I started noticing things I should have seen years ago. The way Ethan only spoke to me when he needed something. The way Melissa corrected little details in my stories as if I were becoming forgetful. The way my mother constantly brought up retirement communities lately, always disguised as concern. "They have lovely activities there," she'd say. Women your age seem happier with more support. Women your age. Burden. Lonely. Unneeded. The words echoed in my head while I stared down at my untouched food. Across the room hung an old family photo taken 15 years earlier on Cape Cod. Daniel had his arm around my shoulders. Ethan was smiling naturally back then, before stress and money changed him into someone I barely recognized. And me? I looked happy. Not perfect. Not young. But valued. I kept staring at that photo while the conversation around the table drifted toward mortgage rates, property taxes, and housing prices in Connecticut. And then Ethan said something that made the entire room suddenly feel 10 degrees colder. Honestly, with how expensive everything is getting, families have to make practical decisions now. Practical decisions. I didn't know it yet, but before that night ended, I would finally understand exactly what kind of decision my family had already started making about me. I barely touched my dinner that night, but nobody seemed to notice. Ethan spent most of the evening talking about rising interest rates while Melissa scrolled through real estate listings on her phone between bites of rosemary potatoes. My father quietly refilled everyone's wine glasses without saying much, and my mother kept correcting small details in every conversation like she always did. That restaurant was in Vermont, not New Hampshire. Daniel bought that car in 1998, not 1996. Margaret always forgets things lately. Every comment sounded harmless on the surface, but after what I had overheard outside, each word landed differently. I suddenly felt like a stranger sitting at my own family table, studying people I thought I knew. You should really think about downsizing eventually, Melissa said casually while folding her napkin beside her plate. Houses are so much work for one person. I looked up slowly. My house is fine. She smiled too quickly. Of course it is. I just mean long term. Long term. Another phrase people use when they are trying to move your life around without saying it directly. Ethan leaned back in his chair and nodded. Honestly, Mom, maintaining a 4-bedroom colonial by yourself has to be exhausting. The strange part was not what he said. It was how prepared he sounded saying it, almost like they had rehearsed this conversation before I arrived. I glanced toward my father, hoping maybe he would change the subject, but he focused on cutting his chicken into tiny pieces without looking at me. That hurt more than I wanted to admit. My father had always avoided confrontation, but silence becomes its own kind of betrayal after enough years. I like my house, I said again quietly. Your father built the back deck himself. For a brief second, the room went still. Daniel had built that cedar deck the summer before he died. Ethan was 22 then, home from college, helping him stain the wood in the July heat while classic rock played through an old radio near the garage. Some of my happiest memories still lived in that backyard. The idea of leaving it felt like erasing the last proof that my husband had once existed there. Melissa took a sip of wine before speaking again. Nobody is saying you need to leave tomorrow. But she smiled at Ethan right after saying it. A small glance. Fast enough that most people would miss it. I did not. The conversation shifted again, but now I watched everything differently. Ethan mentioning property taxes twice in 10 minutes. My mother asking whether I still kept important documents in the home office upstairs. Melissa bringing up a new luxury senior living community 30 miles away with excellent amenities. The entire dinner suddenly felt less like family time and more like a meeting I had not realized I was attending. By dessert, my stomach hurt too much to eat the blueberry pie I brought. My mother complimented it anyway without tasting more than one bite. You always did know how to bake, she said, absent-mindedly while checking her watch. Did, past tense again. Around 8:30 Ethan stood and stretched his arms. I should help Melissa load the leftovers into the car. They had already packed containers before dinner even ended. Another strange detail. I offered to help clean the kitchen out of habit, but my mother waved me away. Melissa and I already handled most of it earlier. Of course they did. Because apparently the evening had been carefully arranged long before I walked through the front door. I excused myself to the downstairs bathroom just to breathe for a minute away from everyone. The mirror above the sink reflected a woman who suddenly looked much older than she had that morning. Not because of wrinkles or gray hair. Because humiliation ages people faster than time ever could. I turned on the faucet to drown out the muffled voices from the dining room, but even through running water I could still hear faint pieces of conversation. She cannot keep up forever. The market is good right now. If we wait too long. Then silence when someone noticed my footsteps returning down the hallway. When I came back into the dining room, everyone was suddenly smiling again. Melissa handed me my coat before I even asked for it. "Roads are supposed to get icy tonight," she said sweetly. "You should probably head home soon." Home. The words sounded heavier now. My father walked me to the front door while the others stayed near the kitchen pretending to organize leftovers. For a moment, I thought maybe he would finally say something honest. Maybe apologize. Maybe explain. Instead, he only adjusted his cardigan nervously and said, "Drive carefully, sweetheart." Sweetheart. The same word he used when I was 10 years old and afraid of thunderstorms. I stared at him for several seconds, searching his face for some sign that I still mattered in this family beyond legal documents and spare bedrooms. But he looked tired. Smaller somehow. Like a man who had already surrendered to decisions other people made for him. Outside, the air smelled like rain and cold pavement. My heels clicked softly against the stone walkway while I walked toward my car parked beneath the maple trees. Through the dining room window, I could still see everyone inside laughing about something. Ethan had his arm around Melissa. My mother was pouring another glass of wine. Nobody looked toward the driveway. Nobody noticed me standing there alone for a few extra seconds holding my purse against my chest while a terrible realization slowly settled into my mind. They were not worried about me being lonely. They were worried about me becoming inconvenient. The next morning I woke up at 5:30 without needing an alarm, even though I had barely slept. Rain tapped softly against the bedroom windows while the old grandfather clock downstairs echoed through the house every hour like a reminder that time keeps moving whether families survive or not. For several minutes I stayed in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation from dinner over and over in my mind. Once you realize people are hiding something from you, your brain starts reopening old memories like boxes in an attic. Small moments that once seemed harmless suddenly look completely different. Ethan insisting on helping me organize my financial paperwork last Thanksgiving. Melissa asking detailed questions about my monthly expenses during Christmas brunch. My mother casually mentioning waiting lists at retirement communities 3 separate times in 1 month. At the time, I thought they were concerned about me getting older. Now I understood they were studying me. I finally got up and walked downstairs barefoot across the hardwood floors Daniel refinished himself 20 years ago. The house still smelled faintly like cedar and coffee no matter how many seasons passed. Some mornings that smell comforted me. This morning it made me ache. I stood in the kitchen making tea while staring out the window at the backyard deck Daniel built before he died. The wood had faded over the years, but I still remembered him standing there shirtless in the July heat with sawdust on his jeans, laughing because Ethan accidentally hammered his thumb instead of the nail. Back then our house was loud and full of life. Ethan brought college friends home every summer. Music drifted through open windows. There were soccer cleats by the back door, and pizza boxes stacked in the kitchen after movie nights. Now the silence felt enormous. Around 7:15 my phone buzzed on the counter. Melissa. I stared at her name for several seconds before answering. "Good morning," I said carefully. Her voice sounded overly cheerful. "Hi, Margaret. I just wanted to check that you got home safely last night." The concern in her tone sounded polished, almost professional. "I got home fine." "Good." Ethan was worried because of the weather. Another lie. Ethan had not looked worried about me once all evening. I waited quietly while she searched for her real reason for calling. Finally she said it. "Actually, Ethan and I were thinking maybe we could stop by this weekend and help you sort through some things around the house. Maybe declutter a little." "Declutter?" Another harmless word that suddenly sounded dangerous. I am not planning on getting rid of anything, I replied. A brief silence followed before her voice softened even more. Of course not. We just think it might make life easier for you. Easier for me. Everyone suddenly seemed very interested in what was easier for me lately. After we hung up, I carried my tea into Daniel's old home office. Most of the room looked exactly the same as the day he died 13 years earlier. Dark oak bookshelves. Framed Red Sox memorabilia. His reading glasses still sitting inside the top desk drawer because I never had the heart to move them. I opened the curtains and sat down at the desk, trying to calm the uneasy feeling growing in my chest. That was when I noticed the file cabinet drawer slightly open. I frowned immediately because I almost never left it that way. Inside were years of paperwork neatly organized into hanging folders. Insurance documents. Tax returns. Mortgage records. Retirement statements. But one folder near the back looked crooked, like someone had removed it recently and shoved it back too quickly. My hands suddenly felt cold as I pulled it out. Property records. Inside sat copies of my house deed, old refinancing paperwork, and several legal documents I had not looked at in years. But there was also something new. A business card attached to a yellow sticky note written in Ethan's handwriting. Ask about transfer process and tax implications. I stared at the note so long my vision blurred slightly. Transfer process. My heartbeat became uneven. Ethan had been in this office 2 weeks ago helping me reconnect the printer after it stopped working. I remembered leaving him alone upstairs for nearly 20 minutes while I made sandwiches in the kitchen. At the time, it never crossed my mind to wonder what else he might be doing. Slowly, I sat down in Daniel's leather chair while the rain continued falling outside the windows. Every instinct in my body told me something was deeply wrong now. Not imagined. Not exaggerated. Planned? I reached deeper into the folder and found another paper folded near the back. It was a brochure from an upscale senior living community in Stamford. Across the front, smiling gray-haired couples played cards beside a fireplace under large elegant letters that read, "Where your next chapter begins." A small circle in blue ink had been drawn around the phrase, "Financial transition assistance available." I lowered the paper carefully onto the desk and looked around the office in silence. Suddenly the room did not feel comforting anymore. It felt watched. Studied. Measured. Like pieces of my life were already being quietly evaluated by people waiting for the right moment to move me out of the way. For the next 3 days, I said nothing to anyone. That was the strange thing about betrayal at my age. When you are younger, pain makes you emotional. But when you are older, pain makes you quiet. I went through my normal routines carefully, almost mechanically. I watered the hydrangeas beside the front porch. I folded laundry while old jazz records played softly in the kitchen. I drove to St. Andrews on Wednesday morning to organize canned goods at the pantry. Outwardly, everything looked normal. Inside, I felt like someone had slowly removed the floor beneath my life without warning me. The hardest part was not even the possibility that Ethan wanted my house. It was realizing how long these conversations had probably been happening without me. Once your trust breaks, your memories start rearranging themselves into something uglier. Thursday afternoon, I stopped at a grocery store near my parents' neighborhood after volunteering. While reaching for coffee creamer, I heard Melissa's voice near the floral section. Instinctively, I stepped behind the end of the aisle before she noticed me. She was speaking to someone on the phone, laughing softly. "No, not yet," she said. "We are trying to do this carefully because Ethan does not want her getting emotional." My stomach tightened instantly. "Honestly, the house alone is probably worth close to $900,000 now," she continued. "If everything works out, we could finally move closer to Greenwich like we wanted." I stood perfectly still beside a refrigerator filled with orange juice while cold air blew against my arms. Melissa lowered her voice after that, but I still caught pieces. "The retirement place looks amazing. Her mother agrees. She cannot manage alone forever anyway." Then she turned the corner suddenly, pushing her shopping cart toward produce, and I ducked my head quickly before she could see me. I waited nearly 10 minutes before leaving the aisle. My hands shook so badly at checkout that I accidentally dropped my credit card on the counter. The teenage cashier smiled politely while handing it back to me. "Rough day?" she asked kindly. I almost laughed at how impossible that question felt to answer. Later that evening, rain clouds rolled over the neighborhood again while I sat alone in Daniel's office rereading the documents from the file cabinet. This time I noticed something else tucked behind the property records. A folded legal envelope with a date from almost 8 months earlier. My chest tightened immediately. Inside was a consultation summary from a law office in Stamford. At the top of the page, beneath the attorney's letterhead, were words that made my entire body go cold. Discussion regarding estate transition planning for elderly parent. Elderly parent. Not mother. Not Margaret. Just elderly parent. Like I was already becoming paperwork instead of a person. Ethan's name appeared twice throughout the document. Melissa's once. And near the bottom, handwritten in blue ink, was a sentence underlined heavily. Need to determine mental competency timeline if resistance occurs. I stared at those words so long the room became completely silent around me. Resistance. They were already preparing for me to disagree before anyone had even spoken to me honestly. A terrible heaviness settled into my chest then, not dramatic or explosive, just deep and exhausting. The kind of sadness that comes from realizing your own child has started discussing your future like a business problem. I slowly leaned back in Daniel's chair and looked toward the family photographs lining the bookshelf. Ethan at age 7 holding a Little League trophy. Ethan graduating college in his navy cap and gown. Ethan standing beside me at Daniel's funeral with his arm around my shoulders while both of us tried not to cry in front of relatives. I remembered every sacrifice connected to those pictures. The second mortgage I took out for tuition payments. The years I worked Saturdays at the insurance office. The vacations I skipped so Ethan could have opportunities Daniel never had growing up. And somehow all those years had quietly transformed into legal consultations about removing me from my own home. My phone buzzed suddenly on the desk beside me, startling me out of my thoughts. Ethan. I stared at his name for several seconds before answering. "Hey Mom," he said warmly. Too warmly. "I was thinking maybe I could stop by tomorrow afternoon and help you organize some paperwork. You know, make sure everything is updated properly." I closed my eyes slowly. There it was again. The paperwork. The documents. The planning. "That is thoughtful," I replied calmly. "But I already handled most of it." A pause followed. "You sure?" "Yes." Another pause. Then his tone shifted slightly, almost cautious. "You sound tired." Not sad. Not upset. Tired. Because tired people are easier to manage. "Long week," I said quietly. "Well," he continued, "Melissa found this incredible retirement community near the water. Not saying you need it now, obviously. But maybe it would not hurt to look at options eventually." I looked around the office one more time while he spoke. Daniel's books. Daniel's desk. Daniel's handwriting still scribbled on an old notepad near the printer. This house was not simply property. It was the last physical place where my real life still existed. And suddenly I understood something very clearly. Everyone around me had already started treating my future like a negotiation. The only person who had not been included in those conversations was me. Saturday arrived colder than expected for early April, with gray clouds hanging low over the neighborhood and damp wind rattling the bare tree branches outside my kitchen windows. Around 10 in the morning, Ethan pulled into my driveway in his dark blue SUV with Melissa beside him holding 2 coffees from the expensive cafe they liked near the marina. Watching them through the curtains, I realized how carefully they presented themselves now. Clean clothes. Warm smiles. Concern wrapped neatly in politeness. People always imagine betrayal looks cruel and obvious, but most of the time it arrives wearing kindness like a costume. I opened the front door before they could knock. "Good morning," Melissa said brightly while handing me one of the coffees. "Oat milk latte." Your favorite. I thanked her quietly and stepped aside so they could enter. Ethan looked around the foyer immediately, though he tried to make it seem casual. House looks great, Mom. Another performance. They had not come to admire the house. They had come to evaluate it. I could feel it now in every glance they exchanged. Melissa walked slowly through the living room while complimenting things she had seen 100 times before. I always loved these built-in shelves. This natural light is incredible. You have so much space here. Space. Value. Property. Everything sounded different now. Ethan followed me into the kitchen where I began rinsing strawberries at the sink. You did not need to come all the way over here just to help with paperwork, I said calmly. He leaned against the counter and shrugged. I worry about you, Mom. I almost asked him since when. Instead, I stayed quiet. Silence had started teaching me more than questions ever did. Melissa joined us carrying one of the old family photo albums from the coffee table. I found this in the living room, she said, smiling. You and Daniel looked so happy. I dried my hands slowly before taking the album from her. On the front cover was a faded picture from Cape Cod almost 20 years ago. Daniel standing beside me near the ocean with one arm around my waist while Ethan grinned awkwardly beside us as a teenager. Looking at that photograph suddenly felt painful now, like staring into evidence from a life that no longer belonged to me. Dad really loved this house, Ethan said quietly while glancing around the kitchen. I know. But I also think he would want you somewhere easier to manage eventually. There it was again. Easier. Safer. Better for me. Every sentence carefully polished to sound compassionate, while slowly guiding me toward the same conclusion. Melissa sat at the kitchen table and crossed her legs neatly. Actually, we brought something we thought you might want to look at. My chest tightened immediately. Ethan reached into his leather messenger bag and removed a glossy folder. Stamford Shores Senior Living Community. The same brochure I found hidden in Daniel's office. I kept my expression neutral even though my pulse quickened. We toured it last weekend, Melissa said gently. Just to gather information. Last weekend. While I sat alone at home believing my family still respected me, they had already been touring places to move me into. Ethan opened the folder and slid several photographs across the table. Elegant dining rooms. Smiling elderly couples playing cards. Fitness classes. Garden paths beside the water. It is honestly beautiful, Mom, he said. And there is a waiting list, so planning ahead matters. Planning ahead. Another phrase that sounded harmless until you realized nobody included you in the planning. I am not moving, I said calmly. A quick silence followed. Melissa exchanged a look with Ethan before speaking carefully. Nobody is forcing anything. We just think you deserve support. Support for what? I asked quietly. Ethan sighed softly, almost like I was being difficult. Living alone at your age comes with risks. Risks. There it was. The word hidden beneath all the others. Burden. Lonely. Elderly. Risk. I looked at my son sitting across from me in the kitchen where I once packed his elementary school lunches every morning before work. The same kitchen where Daniel taught him how to carve a Thanksgiving turkey. The same kitchen where Ethan cried in my arms after his first heartbreak at 17. And now he sat there discussing me like a long-term liability requiring management. Melissa slid another document toward me. This explains their financial transition assistance program. I recognized the same circled sentence from the brochure hidden in my office. My fingertips went cold against the coffee mug in my hands. They were not gathering information. They were already preparing logistics. What exactly are you two planning? I asked finally. Ethan answered too fast. Nothing. We are just trying to think ahead responsibly. But his eyes shifted briefly toward the hallway leading to Daniel's office upstairs. That tiny movement told me more than his words ever could. He wanted something inside this house. Maybe the property itself. Maybe access to documents. Maybe control. And suddenly another memory surfaced sharply in my mind. 3 months earlier, Ethan insisted on helping me set up online banking because he claimed my old system was outdated. He spent nearly an hour alone with my laptop at the dining room table while I folded laundry upstairs. At the time, I felt grateful. Now I wondered what else he might have been accessing while pretending to help me. I looked down at the glossy brochure one more time before closing the folder gently. Then I smiled for the first time all morning. Not because I felt comforted. Because in that exact moment, something inside me finally changed. The frightened confusion I carried all week slowly disappeared and something colder replaced it. Clarity. They believed I was becoming weak. They believed age made me easier to manipulate. And for the first time since that family dinner, I stopped feeling hurt long enough to become careful. The following Monday morning, I drove to Stamford alone under a pale gray sky that made the entire coastline look washed out and distant. I wore my navy wool coat, pearl earrings Daniel gave me on our 25th anniversary, and carried a leather folder tucked neatly beneath my arm. Nobody in my family knew where I was going. For the first time in years, I intended to keep it that way. The law office sat on the third floor of an old brick building overlooking the harbor. Inside, everything smelled faintly like coffee and polished wood. A receptionist with silver glasses smiled warmly when I introduced myself. "Mrs. Collins, Attorney Whitmore will see you shortly." I sat quietly near the window while boats rocked gently in the marina outside. My hands rested calmly in my lap, but inside I felt something shifting. Not panic anymore. Not heartbreak either. Something steadier. The moment trust disappears, survival begins replacing emotion. Attorney Daniel Whitmore turned out to be a calm man in his early 60s with careful eyes and the kind of voice people trust immediately. He shook my hand firmly before leading me into his office. "What can I help you with today?" he asked. For several seconds, I looked around the room without speaking. Framed law degrees. Shelves filled with estate planning books. Large windows facing the water. Finally, I said the words out loud for the first time. "I think my family is preparing to take control of my life." His expression did not change. That alone comforted me. No pity. No surprise. Just attention. Over the next hour, I explained everything carefully. The family dinner. The overheard conversation. The hidden paperwork. The retirement community brochures. Ethan's sudden interest in my finances. Melissa's comments about selling the house. My mother's involvement. Attorney Whitmore listened quietly while taking occasional notes. When I finished, he folded his hands together thoughtfully. "Mrs. Collins," he said calmly, "you would be surprised how often situations like this begin with language disguised as concern." I looked down at my wedding ring resting against the folder in my lap. "They keep talking about what is best for me." "Of course," he replied gently. "Because phrases like support, safety, and planning ahead sound compassionate. But, legally speaking, intent matters." That word stayed with me. Intent. He then asked several practical questions. Did Ethan have access to my bank accounts? No, but he helped set up online banking recently. Had I signed any documents I did not fully review? Not yet. Did anyone possess power of attorney? No. Attorney Whitmore nodded slowly. Good. That gives you control. Control. I had not realized how desperately I needed to hear that word. He spent the next 40 minutes helping me understand exactly how vulnerable older adults can become once family members start establishing legal influence quietly over time. Financial dependency. Medical authority. Property transfers. Competency disputes. Every explanation made my stomach sink lower because pieces of my recent conversations suddenly fit together too perfectly. Ethan asking whether I still drove at night. Melissa bringing up memory loss statistics during dinner one evening. My mother joking that I repeated stories more often lately. Tiny comments scattered across months that now looked less accidental. You mentioned a note referencing mental competency. Attorney Whitmore said carefully. That concerns me. I swallowed hard and slid the folded consultation paper across his desk. He read it silently, then removed his glasses for a moment. "Mrs. Collins, I strongly advise protecting yourself immediately." Something inside me hardened completely then. Not emotionally. Practically. Like a door quietly closing. Over the next 2 hours, we updated everything. My will. My medical directives. My financial access permissions. Attorney Whitmore recommended moving certain documents into a trust structure that would require independent oversight instead of family control. I agreed. Calmly. Thoroughly. Without hesitation. By the time we finished, the rain outside had stopped and sunlight reflected softly off the water beyond the windows. As Attorney Whitmore organized the paperwork, he looked at me carefully. "You understand this may upset your family if they discover these changes." I almost smiled. "I think they are already upset that I still have choices." For the first time in weeks, he laughed softly. Before leaving, I also asked him another question. If someone wanted to prove an older person was mentally incapable, what would they usually do first? His expression became serious again. They often begin by documenting small mistakes, encouraging dependency, or creating a narrative that the person is struggling alone. A cold silence filled the office after that because suddenly I remembered every tiny correction my mother made at dinner. Every exaggerated concern. Every time Melissa insisted I looked tired. Every moment Ethan offered unnecessary help. They were not just trying to move me. They were building a story about me. On the drive home, I stopped at a small diner near the shoreline and ordered coffee with grilled cheese on rye bread. I sat alone near the window while seagulls circled the parking lot outside. For the first time since that Sunday dinner, I no longer felt confused. Hurt still existed somewhere beneath the surface, but clarity had finally become stronger. My family believed they were slowly cornering an aging widow who did not understand what was happening around her. What they did not realize was that I had spent 38 years working insurance claims, reading contracts, catching lies, and surviving after losing the only person who ever truly loved me without conditions. Age had not made me helpless. It had simply made me quieter. And quiet women notice everything. Over the next 2 weeks, I became someone my family no longer recognized, although none of them seemed to understand why. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped volunteering unnecessary information. I stopped answering every phone call immediately the way I used to. And strangely enough, the quieter I became, the more nervous everyone around me started acting. My mother called 3 times in one afternoon asking whether I had paid my electric bill because she claimed she saw a news report about scams targeting seniors. Melissa texted me links to articles about safe aging transitions. Ethan suddenly offered to handle my taxes for me even though I had managed my own finances longer than he had been alive. Every gesture felt coated in the same artificial concern now, and once you see manipulation clearly, it becomes impossible to unsee. On Thursday evening, Ethan invited me to another family dinner at my parents' house. "Nothing formal," he said casually over the phone. "Just family." The moment he said those words, I knew something was coming. People planning uncomfortable conversations always try to make things sound relaxed beforehand. I agreed anyway. "I will be there," I told him calmly. After we hung up, I walked upstairs and opened my bedroom closet slowly. For a long moment, I stared at the rows of clothes hanging neatly inside. Then I reached for the cream-colored cashmere sweater Daniel bought me during our trip to Vermont years ago. The next morning, I scheduled an appointment at the salon near the harbor where I had not been in almost 6 months. By Saturday afternoon, my silver hair had been freshly styled into soft waves around my shoulders, my nails were neatly polished pale pink, and for the first time in weeks, I looked directly at myself in the mirror without appearing exhausted. Not because I suddenly felt happy. Because I understood something important now. My family expected decline from me. They expected confusion, fragility, dependence. So I decided they would see the exact opposite. Sunday evening arrived cool and windy. When I pulled into my parents' driveway just before 6, Ethan's SUV and Melissa's white Lexus were already parked outside beside my father's old Buick. Through the dining room windows, I could see warm candlelight flickering across the table. Everything looked beautiful again. Carefully arranged. Controlled. I carried a bottle of wine inside and immediately noticed the slight pause when everyone saw me. Melissa blinked first. "Margaret, you look amazing." Her surprise sounded genuine. Ethan stared for half a second too long before smiling awkwardly. "Wow, Mom. You have been busy." "Just taking better care of myself," I replied softly while handing my mother the wine. Even my mother looked unsettled. Her eyes moved carefully over my coat, my hair, my posture. She expected someone unraveling. Instead, I stood straighter than I had in years. Dinner began pleasantly enough. Roast beef. Garlic mashed. Potatoes. Expensive red wine Ethan probably could not actually afford comfortably right now. Everyone behaved unusually polite, almost cautious. But beneath the surface, tension drifted through the room like static electricity before a storm. I noticed how Ethan kept glancing toward a dark leather folder sitting beside his chair near the dining room wall. Melissa touched his arm twice under the table like she was reminding him to stay patient. My mother drank more wine than usual. Halfway through dinner, my father excused himself quietly to watch a baseball game in the den. I almost felt sorry for him. He had spent his entire life avoiding difficult moments until they swallowed him whole anyway. As soon as he disappeared down the hallway, the atmosphere changed instantly. Melissa folded her napkin carefully before speaking. "Margaret, we actually wanted to discuss something important tonight." There it was. Finally. I placed my fork down gently and looked at her calmly. "All right." Ethan cleared his throat and reached for the leather folder. "Mom, we have been thinking a lot about your future." The script had officially begun. He slid several papers onto the table between us. Typed documents. Charts. Brochures. One page listed estimated home values in my neighborhood. Another displayed pricing information for Stamford Shore's senior living community. They had prepared an entire presentation. "This is not about taking anything from you," Ethan said quickly. "We just think now is the best time to make smart long-term decisions while the housing market is strong." Housing market. Not memories. Not family. Market value. Melissa leaned forward gently. "You deserve a simpler life without stress. And honestly," my mother added while sipping wine, "that house is too much for one woman now." I looked around the table slowly. 3 people sitting beneath warm candlelight discussing the dismantling of my life, while pretending it was an act of kindness. But what surprised me most was not their greed anymore. It was their certainty. They truly believed I would eventually surrender if they pushed carefully enough. Ethan slid another document toward me. "If you sell now, you could move somewhere comfortable and still help secure the family's future at the same time." Family's future. There it was at last. Not my future. Theirs. My fingertips rested lightly against the edge of the papers while silence settled over the room. Melissa watched me carefully. My mother looked impatient. Ethan looked nervous but determined. They all expected tears, confusion, maybe resistance followed by emotional exhaustion. Instead, I smiled softly and folded my hands together on the table. "You know," I said quietly, "it is interesting hearing everyone suddenly so concerned about my future." For the first time all evening, nobody spoke. The silence after my question stretched across the dining room like thin ice waiting to crack. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair first. Melissa picked up her wine glass but did not drink from it. My mother sighed dramatically and folded her arms. "Margaret," she said sharply, "nobody here is attacking you." I looked at her calmly beneath the warm chandelier light. "Interesting," I replied softly. "Because for weeks I have felt like everyone is discussing my life as if I am already gone." Ethan immediately leaned forward. "Mom, that is not fair." "Fair. Another word people use when they are nervous about being exposed. Is it not?" I asked quietly. "You toured retirement communities without telling me. You researched transferring my property. You met with legal advisors. You discussed my competency before speaking honestly to me once. The color drained from Melissa's face instantly. Ethan froze. Across the table, my mother stared at me in stunned silence for the first time all evening. That told me everything I needed to know. They never imagined I already knew how far things had gone. How did you even? Ethan stopped himself halfway through the sentence. I smiled faintly. You left paperwork in my house. No one spoke. Even the ticking wall clock near the kitchen suddenly sounded loud. Melissa finally recovered first. Margaret, you are misunderstanding everything. Am I? I asked gently. Then I reached into my handbag and placed a folded document carefully onto the table between us. Attorney Whitmore's updated trust confirmation. Ethan stared down at the page while confusion slowly turned into alarm. What is this? Protection, I answered calmly. Something I should have arranged sooner. My mother leaned forward sharply and grabbed her reading glasses. What did you do? The question almost made me laugh because suddenly everyone sounded terrified that I had made decisions without their permission. I updated my estate planning, I said quietly. I moved the property into a protected trust structure. Any future decisions regarding my home or finances now require independent legal oversight. Ethan looked at me like he no longer recognized the woman sitting across from him. Mom, why would you do something like that without talking to us? There it was again. Us. As though my own life somehow belonged to a committee now. Because none of you talked to me first, I replied. Melissa sat up straighter, trying to regain control of the conversation. We were only trying to help you prepare. By discussing mental competency timelines? I asked softly. The room went completely still again. Ethan looked horrified now, not because he felt guilty, but because he realized how much I had discovered. You went through private documents? He asked defensively. Private? I repeated. They were hidden inside my office. Inside my home. My mother suddenly slammed her wine glass onto the table hard enough to rattle the silverware. You are overreacting, she snapped. At your age, families have to make practical arrangements. I turned slowly toward her. No, I said quietly. Families have conversations. What you were doing was something else. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Ethan rubbed both hands across his face and finally dropped the polite performance entirely. Fine, he muttered. Do you want honesty? Yes, we were worried. That house is enormous. You are alone all the time. And frankly, none of us know how much longer you can realistically manage everything yourself. The cruelty of those words was not even in what he said. It was how impatient he sounded saying them. Like my continued independence had become inconvenient to their plans. I raised you in that house, I said quietly. I know, he replied. And we appreciate that. But things change. Appreciate. Such a small word after a lifetime of sacrifice. Melissa spoke carefully again. Nobody wants to hurt you. No, I answered softly. You just wanted me relocated neatly enough that nobody had to feel guilty about benefiting from it. Ethan looked away immediately. That silence was answer enough. I reached into my handbag one final time and removed another envelope. This one thinner. Simpler. I slid it gently across the table toward Ethan. What is this? He asked cautiously. A copy of the updated beneficiary documents. He opened the envelope slowly while Melissa leaned closer beside him. His expression changed almost instantly. Confusion first. Then disbelief. What? Melissa whispered. My mother snatched the papers from his hands aggressively and scanned them with widening eyes. You donated part of the estate? She snapped. Most of it. I corrected calmly. The house will eventually be sold through the trust after my death. The proceeds are designated primarily towards St. Andrew's Community Housing Initiative. Ethan stared at me speechless. You are giving away the house? No, I replied softly. I am giving away the assumption that my life belongs to other people. My mother looked furious now. After everything family has done for you? That sentence almost broke my heart because somehow she still believed I owed everyone repayment simply for existing. No, I said quietly. After everything I did for this family. Across the table, Ethan looked suddenly smaller than I had ever seen him. Not angry anymore. Just shocked. Like he genuinely believed there would always be time to manipulate things back into his control eventually. But that time was gone now. I stood slowly from the table and picked up my coat while candlelight flickered softly across the untouched dessert sitting near the kitchen counter. Nobody tried stopping me. Nobody even knew what to say anymore. As I reached the doorway leading toward the foyer, I paused briefly and looked back at the dining room one final time. My mother sitting rigid with anger. Melissa staring silently at the paperwork. Ethan motionless beneath the chandelier where he once opened Christmas presents as a little boy. Then I said the only thing left worth saying. You called me a burden, I said quietly. So I removed the burden from your future. 3 months later, the hydrangeas beside my front porch had started blooming again. Pale blue petals stretched across the garden beds Daniel planted years ago, and every morning sunlight spilled through the kitchen windows exactly the same way it always had. Funny how houses continue breathing normally even after families fracture inside them. I stood at the sink one quiet Tuesday morning pouring coffee into my favorite white ceramic mug when my phone buzzed softly on the counter. Ethan. For several seconds, I simply stared at his name without moving. Since the dinner at my parents' house, our conversations had become brief and careful. He called twice during the first week after everything happened, sounding angry and confused at first, then strangely formal after Attorney Whitmore contacted him regarding the trust protections. Melissa stopped texting entirely. My mother had not spoken to me once. Only my father mailed a short handwritten note 2 weeks earlier saying he hoped I was eating well and sleeping enough. I finally answered the phone. Good morning, I said calmly. Ethan's voice sounded tired now. Smaller somehow. Hey, Mom. A long silence followed. I waited. I just wanted to check on you, he said quietly. Not because he needed information this time. Because for the first time in months, he sounded uncertain about his place in my life. I am doing well, I replied. Outside the kitchen window, a robin hopped through the garden near the deck Daniel built. The morning air looked warm already, promising one of those peaceful New England summer afternoons where neighborhoods smell faintly like cut grass and barbecue smoke. Ethan cleared his throat softly. Melissa and I separated last week. I closed my eyes briefly, not out of satisfaction but sadness. I am sorry to hear that. And I truly was. Pain inside families spreads outward like cracks through ice. Nobody escapes it untouched. Things got complicated. After. He stopped himself. Neither of us needed him to finish the sentence. After the house. After the trust. After the illusion that my life could be quietly reorganized around everyone else's convenience. I should have handled things differently, he admitted finally. Hearing those words hurt more than anger ever could because somewhere beneath all the manipulation and greed, I suddenly heard my son again. Not the calculating version sitting beneath candlelight with legal folders. Just Ethan. The little boy who once begged me to stay awake during thunderstorms because he hated sleeping alone. Yes, I answered softly. Another silence settled between us. Then he asked quietly, Do you think you can ever forgive me? I looked around the kitchen slowly while morning light touched the old hardwood floors Daniel refinished by hand decades ago. Forgiveness. Such a complicated word at my age. People think forgiveness means pretending nothing happened, but it does not. It simply means deciding your pain will no longer control the rest of your life. I do not know yet, I admitted honestly. But I am trying. After we hung up, I carried my coffee outside onto the back deck. The cedar boards creaked softly beneath my slippers while a warm breeze moved through the trees surrounding the yard. In the distance, lawn mowers hummed faintly through the neighborhood. Normal life continuing everywhere. I sat in the same chair where Daniel used to read newspapers on Sunday mornings and allowed myself, for the first time in months, to simply feel still. Not victorious. Not bitter. Just peaceful. The trust remained in place. The house would eventually fund housing assistance programs through St. Andrews after my death, exactly as planned. Attorney Whitmore said several families would likely benefit from it over the years. Somehow that thought comforted me more than leaving the property to people who only saw its market value. As for my parents, things never fully recovered. My mother refused to apologize because people like her often confuse pride with strength. My father occasionally called quietly when she was asleep. We spoke about baseball games, weather, and once even about Daniel. Never about the betrayal directly. Some wounds become too large for ordinary conversation. But life kept moving anyway. That surprised me most of all. I started taking weekend drives along the Connecticut shoreline again. I joined a small book club at the library downtown. Sometimes I sat alone near the harbor eating lobster rolls while sailboats drifted across the water under pale summer skies. And slowly, the loneliness everyone feared for me became something entirely different. Solitude. Peaceful. Honest. Mine. One evening near the end of July, I found myself standing in the hallway outside the dining room at my parents' house after another small family gathering. The same hallway where everything changed months earlier. Through the doorway, I could hear distant laughter from relatives finishing dessert, while dishes clinked softly against the table. For a moment, I stood completely still, remembering the sentence that shattered my trust forever. She is basically a burden now. Back then, those words nearly destroyed me. But standing there months later, I finally understood something important. The burden was never my age, or my widowhood, or my need for love from the people closest to me. The real burden was spending years believing sacrifice guaranteed loyalty. It does not. Sometimes the people who benefit most from your kindness eventually begin resenting the very person who provided it. I looked through the dining room doorway one last time before quietly picking up my purse. Nobody noticed me leave. And strangely enough, that no longer hurt at all.